educational resources source code. Then open infrastructures. Then, and that's both digital and physical infrastructures. Then we have open engagement with societal actors beyond the scientific community. So really at the same level as open access to publication or open data. And then also the dialogue with other knowledge systems and with marginalized scholars, traditional communities, and others. So really openness in its broader context and in its in a comprehensive way. Now, as you said, it is true that when it comes to open engagement with societal actors beyond the scientific community, it is not as mainstream in all the disciplines or all the relevant disciplines as we would want it to be. But it is a process that is starting, and there is more and more, I think, good practices that are coming out from different communities, different disciplines that we can share to encourage engagement and encourage implementation of these good practices. So coming back to what we can do to make it happen, and what we have been doing on the UNESCO side, is to provide guidance for the understanding. So already, what is engagement? What does that mean? Who is engaging whom, and on what terms, and why? I think this awareness raising and understanding of engagement is extremely important for people to be able to engage. So we have been doing work with different working groups on defining it, making it more understandable for different communities, making it more understandable also for policymakers, so that they understand what kind of policies they would need to put in place to encourage engagement. So it's awareness raising, it is provision of these guides and guidelines, it is also working on collecting good practices and providing platforms where these good practices can be exchanged and where knowledge on engagement can be exchanged, both in terms of what works and also in terms of what doesn't work, so that it cannot be repeated. And I think there is a lot of knowledge around, for example, engagement with citizens, again, in certain disciplines, like environmental disciplines. But there is definitely need for more, and it needs to become an important part of the curricula in general for researchers and for institutions as well. So maybe I'll stop here and then continue later.
Yes, thank you, Anna, for guiding us as to how regarding the process of drafting the recommendations and all the different instruments that are available. I will now turn to Krista about another key document, which is the ALLEA Code of Conduct for Research Integrity, that has also been recognized by the European Commission as a reference document for all EU-funded projects. And for maybe those who are not that familiar, it is a document that describes the professional, legal, and ethical responsibilities of the various stakeholders in the science system to safeguard the integrity of science. So my question is, how do these general principles regarding research ethics and research integrity need to be adjusted or adapted when we open up the scientific system to this broader participation towards citizens or what is called non-traditional stakeholders?
I'll use your...
Yes.
Thank you very much for inviting me to this panel. It's a bit of a third degree, but I hope the atmosphere is friendly anyway. That's I'd like to say a few words about this code of conduct. The latest version of it is this color. I mean, is the revised edition that was approved by the ALLEA board and ALLEA this summer, around end of June. And this code of conduct, as ALLEA is the organization for European academies of science and letters is obviously research oriented, and the ALLEA has as a permanent working group on science and ethics, which I've been a member for a while, and I was chairing this current drafting group for it. By the way, just to correct one thing, my 6-year term on the ALLEA board came to it last year, so that's no longer valid. But the ALLEA document is, as such, it's an interesting document, such because it's a document by ALLEA. So it's a recommendation. It's not a legal document. It's a recommendation to the science or research communities in Europe and by the academies, and it's based on self-regulation of science. The idea is that science corrects or research corrects itself and takes care if there are issues with research integrity, then the system takes care of the problems, that they don't go to law courts. That's the essential idea behind it. But then we have the European Union that has adopted this document as a legal document, so, which, as you mentioned, it needs to be followed, or it needs to be complied with, rather, if you get a grant from the European Union. So there's like two different sides to it, I could say. On the other hand, of course, it is a framework document. So it is at the principle level. It's meant to be the. If you think of different guidelines for national guidelines, institutional guidelines, guidelines on research integrity, which is basically good conduct in research environment, how to behave if you want to be a good researcher, a nice researcher. So these guidelines are at different levels, so it's like layered guidelines, and this one is the top principle level guideline and applies to all kinds of research. So the idea is then when you draft your own guidelines, you use these as the top level, principle level guidelines. What ALLEA thinks is good behavior, if you would put it that way. So I would say that instead of so what its aim is a kind of harmonization of these guidelines. That if you adopt the principles, if you agree with the principles, then your own guidelines should also adopt these principles at the level that is suitable, or much more practical level in many cases, and in that way not lead to any sort of uniformity of guidelines. That's not the idea, but some sort of, I would say, convergence, harmonization of guidelines. That this is what we all believe in. So I would say that yes, you have to think, maybe not sort of adjusting, as you said, but adapting them to your own needs. And of course, citizen science is a very interesting area in a sense that it involves non-traditional groups in what we consider as all actors in the research system. So in a way, they are new actors in the research system. And in these current guidelines, the latest ones, the previous one was published in 2017, and now this was updated. The idea is all the time that probably the next update will appear in 5 years' time. So it's not the final word. But we've tried to keep it short, readable, and again at the very fairly abstract level. But we tried to, in these new guidelines, to emphasize that the responsibility does not only belong to the researchers, but as the research institutions, the funders, even political decision makers should think of what sort of incentives they have for research. And we've all included citizen science, as mentioned, that they're certainly an area where you have to think every time you write the guidelines of what is needed and how can these, what sort of responsibilities the target groups of citizen science, which we've heard this morning is a very wide field, a very, very different field. What can be expected of them? So we could, in a certain sense, we could say that this is the top-level document with principles of good behavior, and here are answers to now in the Pro-Ethics project. It's these documents are compatible, and there's nothing that says that would be controversial. But this ethics framework and guidelines is a practical answer. So again, I think one of the big aims with talking about research integrity at different levels is to make the users, make the research community understand that this is a happy thing and not an obligation. that research integrity, I mean, if that's not an aspect of all research, why do research? Basically, I mean, why would you want to do bad research? So I think that question should be asked, but also it's a dialogue throughout the research process from the design stage. When you start thinking of now talking about these citizen science projects, we have heard this morning how important it is to think of why this type of research is done, who should be asked, who should be involved, and this design stage is, I suppose, it's one of the probably the most important stage in the process. If you think of the end, but we can come back to that later. So I would say that it's very important to think in terms of a dialogue with the guidelines, because I think this is more like a handbook, makes you think, and a process. You have to return to it at the different stages. You have to think of the role of the different actors, and so it's meant to be a document that helps you to avoid the attitude of just ticking the box and thinking that somebody else will do the work. Okay.
Yes, we welcome. Thank you very much. I think it connects very well to a discussion that we started right before the official start of the panel about the type of research that we want and the type of science that we want. Issues that were also brought to the table earlier this morning, and that being said, I would like to turn to René, who has been a prominent voice in cautioning us not to replicate existing structures of inequality when we are trying to shift to this more open and democratic system, and ask him what he sees as the main dangers in terms of reproducing these power structures.
Thank you, Marina. Thank you for the invitation. Well, I think we should have some discussion, so it's my pleasure to announce that what I'm going to say is quite incompatible with what my previous nice colleagues said, and to some extent even our friends from UNESCO. So I think it's really worth going into the tough questions and not put things under the carpet. So let's. I mean, the main question which we first have to ask prior for participation issues where the project like Pro-Ethics and so on has worked on is the question on what type of science we want to have and what type of science actually we want to incentivize and what should it produce. Now, my answer to that question was 15 years ago, we have to have a science which is more responsive to societal concerns and produces socially relevant innovations, which it doesn't. There is a system failure in science, and we have to make a diagnosis why this is the case. So one of the diagnoses back then in 15 years is the same as now, is that there is a lack of openness. And openness is in fact something which is actually obvious for the system of science. You have to be open to make progress. Any scientist would agree to that. And the other dimension I put forward is mutual responsiveness, that actors have to be sort of mandatory answerability to people who have other claims in order to make progress in science. And then, of course, knowledge production, whether this is exclusive for the institution of science or whether there are knowledge actors outside of science which also produce knowledge, then I think the philosophy of science have never produced an effective demarcation criterion. There is no demarcation criterion. That means that openness practiced well means openness not only to knowledge resources, but also to knowledge actors. So, and that then, of course, includes then also citizens. And then you get all these nasty questions, why do citizens not get funding for science and scientists can, although they both can produce knowledge? So you get these type of questions. But I think, back to the diagnosis, I think we had to wait. It was an uphill struggle these last 15 years to make some institutional change. But I think we were helped with COVID, because COVID showed that there is a system failure in science. Science would not produce out of itself vaccines. It would not collaborate out of itself on knowledge sharing in order to have the right information available. There was a massive public intervention necessary in science in order to make this happen. And subsequently billions of euros and dollars support of rich multinationals to bring this all about. Now my issue is, why not for all sustainable development goals like UNESCO? I mean, you said why there are a lot of other societal challenges equally important. We don't do it. Now, back to open science, in 2015, we managed in the Commission to have an open science agenda, which had exactly the 4 pillars which were copy and pasted by the UNESCO declaration. But there is one missing, and that's the crucial one. And that's the one on the reform of the institution of science, what type of incentives we have for researchers in order to produce exactly what. And this is what it's all about. Whether it's knowledge actors within or outside science, it's all about collaboration, which is necessary. We have to collaborate within and beyond science. And we have to be open, otherwise we don't get this knowledge produced for these societal challenges. And that means that we have to change the system of how we reward scientists. And currently we reward scientists predominantly by making them produce a lot of papers. And this is very costly, and it doesn't give science a direction, which is one explanation of the system failure. And it also favors sexy articles in Nature, but they are not necessarily relevant for the type of knowledge we want to have. So there are a lot of unproductive. So to make this story short, I think we make scientists work very hard and very productive in terms of producing papers, but by doing so, we have made the system of science completely unproductive. And if you look to the last 30 years, we hardly have had relevant innovations. We need, for instance, new antibiotics. The last 20 years, not a single one has been produced. So this is not just then for COVID. We have a lot of other problems where equally open science would apply, but also collaboration within was out science. And this is why it's nice to have a UNESCO declaration, but it's just an articulation of something which was helped about eventually by the COVID crisis, but it's of course insufficient in terms of implementation, because there we are independent on what universities do, and there I'm a little bit skeptical, if not very skeptical, because Well, let's at first turn to the shortcomings of my colleague here, because there's nothing against responsible conduct in terms of scientists, how they produce their papers and so on, but it's a much too narrow basis for the issues we have at hand here. It's still I mean, let me tell you a story. This is of course, I'm prejudiced by the fact that I'm handicapped by the fact that I worked too long in the Commission. But I've seen member states fighting about commas and little words in order to agree on something. It takes ages before they agree on something. But if you look to universities, or even worse, academies of science, if they have to agree on something, it took more than 3 decades before they got the Singapore statement in 2010, which eventually ALLEA built up on under enormous pressure of the European Commission, by the way. Otherwise, they would not have done it. So scientists actually don't like regulation. This is also, of course, why you say, well, we do it all by self-regulation, but this is precisely the point. We are now in a situation, we cannot let science self-regulate it anymore. It's bankrupt. We have to intervene massively. We should not leave them alone. We have to intervene. We have to do exactly what they don't want us to do. Self-regulation of science. No way in my things. It has not to be self-regulated. We need new forums, and the science councils, they should not encourage self-regulation. No, they have to intervene. We have to intervene in other deliberative forums, maybe with the help of technology assessment officers, which discuss the priority of research and how we drive knowledge to particular goals and how we can incentivize our systems. And this means much more that we have to reward collaboration. We have to reward sharing of information prior to publication, not post-publication. It's exactly the opposite as what this document wants you to do. So, and this is also a new thing in science. I mean, and this is what we have to change. If we don't change that, we never will overcome the system problem of system failure of science. Now, where we are with this is that under the pressure of the previous crisis of COVID, there is some incentives for universities. They feel a sort of moral obligation to do something. So there is a coalition ongoing at the moment where some efforts have been made to revise the system. And in some countries, actually, especially in the Netherlands, there has been an overhaul of the evaluation system. And this brings me to my final point. The evaluation system is, of course, based on definitions of non-existing definitions of excellence. So I mean, this is also a form of self-regulation of science. I mean, the scientists will say we discuss among ourselves what is excellent science, and they cannot provide you a definition with it. They don't know what it is. The same like the bankers don't know what independence of bankers mean in the financial crisis. Remember, they also wanted to be independent. This is why we got the financial crisis. Now we have a crisis in science because of the excellence criterion. Now I think we moved a little bit beyond that. I mean, at least at the EU level, because since the first time, since I think 4 or 5 decades, the excellence criterion has a little bit modified in terms of inclusiveness of actors beyond academic operators. So there has been some progress at this front. But this is hard work, and this is work done outside of science. Scientists themselves would never do this. So we need an absolutely massive intervention in the scientific system to have societally relevant knowledge produced, if this is what we want.
Thank you. I think the discussion is heating up, and I think that Anna would like to make a short comment, and maybe, and Krista as well, before I move on to Moritz. Yes, yeah, Anna, please.
Just very briefly, just to say that in terms of the UNESCO recommendation, so it gives, of course, the definition, and it gives the values, etc., but it also gives a series of very specific actions to governments, to institutions, and other actors. And of course, incentives and changing the incentive system is one of the key actions in the recommendation, with some examples of what already exists in terms of looking into the models of how incentive systems should change, how the evaluation system should change, etc. I think what is nice in the recommendation is that it's a framework for a system change, right? And it's a framework for a cultural shift. And as such, including this part of open engagement and dialogue with other knowledge systems, it basically says it is not just about opening up access to products of science, it is about opening up the process of science. And in that sense, there are so many different things that need to be done and changed in the system, because the system as it is right now does not allow for the engagement in the process of science. It's very easy to open scientific articles. That's the easiest part, most probably. Of course, there are financial implications, there are commercial issues included, etc. But at the end of the day, it's the easiest part. What is really difficult, because it's a part of a huge cultural change and shift, as you were saying, is opening up the process of science at the different stages of the scientific system, and not keeping science as something very closed, elitist for some, certain people, but really opening up for all. And I think the nice thing about the recommendation is that it gives a vision of how it should look like. Now, it is a vision, it's going to be difficult, but at least it's an acknowledgement that the system needs to change. And there are infrastructures that need to be put in place for the system to be able to change as well. Because we can, again, as it is right now, the system is not prone to openness in different ways, by incentives, by infrastructures, by capacities. There are no capacities, individual capacities for openness. There are no institutional capacities yet for openness. But that's what kind of makes it interesting. Now is the time to change. We've seen with COVID, there are other issues that are coming up. There are more and more initiatives that are pushing and moving this change. And I think what we'll be talking about is part of those initiatives or your initiatives. What we are also wondering a lot is thinking about the code of conduct and everything else, and about open science. When do we include open science in the educational curricula? For the moment, it's also just not embedded in the curricula of researchers or in the curricula of policymakers or anybody else. So everybody comes to a certain stage in what they're doing, and then this open science comes to them, and they're like, where does this come from? We have not heard about this before. It has not been taught to us, etc. So one of the important things I think for us also to collectively think about is how do you also change the curricula to include openness, to include ethics, to include all of these different frameworks already in the researchers' curricula way before they come to a lab. So just that.
Okay, thank you. I've disagreed with René before and will continue to do so. So I think we're talking about different things, quite simply. I described what the purpose of the ALLEA Code of Conduct is and its scope and who it was produced by. It's an enabling document, not a preventive one. And I would also say that this current version very strongly promotes the CARA coalition and the ways to assess research performance and impact, and is very much against the incentives, current incentives, with the quantity-based incentives for research performance assessment, and sees that as one of the main reasons for breaches in research integrity in good behavior. So so what you're talking about is more like freedom of research, and you would like to control that. As far as as how I read you. Okay, because you'd like the somehow to be some sort of a god who decides on the type of research that is needed for the big problems to solve them, and then in a certain sense, that is one of the big dilemmas in freedom of research. So there's what is often called strategic research, that the powers above us, often political decision makers, national level, very often European Commission level, who decide that this is the type of research we need, and often also decide or describe what sort of results you should get. And that, I think, is a breach of more, not so much of research integrity as freedom of research, but that's not the topic today. I would and who is because many science academies, most of ALLEA, I would say the ALLEA members, when they've expressed their opinion, is that they emphasize the importance of curiosity research, basic research, call it whatever, but the need to not to do something that is expected of you, but rather do something that is not expected of you and that can prove to be of great importance. So that's my reply to you.
Thank you. I will move on to Moritz, who brings a bit of a different perspective in the sense that he's the coordinator of Citizen Science Network in Germany. So he has he brings in this perspective. So what I would like to ask him is about the challenges that you see in elevating citizen science and integrating it into excellent research. We've talked about a lot, I think, today about excellent research.
So I would agree with your statement that we are currently lacking a common definition of what is excellent research. But in my view, right now, mostly we think of excellent research as research that has a high impact inside the academic sphere. So before the discussion, we talked about high impact publications and so on. So with this in mind, I think the best way to get academia to acknowledge that participatory research can actually be a method that produces excellent research results. I think we have right now choose formats or forms of dissemination that show that actually inside of the current thinking of the academic world, as the high impact publications I already mentioned, that it's put it on a broader scale that these kind of publications are also can be results of this participatory research process. So in Germany right now, our platform, we are awarding for the first time this year a citizen science prize to papers that were written in the process of citizen science projects, actually. So it will be awarded in November. So we think, okay, we don't have to turn the assessment of research excellence upside down. Just to say it boldly, we have to destroy the system from the inside by organizing this prize and showing to German researchers that their citizen science can actually be a way to publish high influential papers.
Thank you. So taking up on this, on your statement, so what would you say would be needed in terms of policy commitment to address any limitations that you see in terms of participatory activities and making them more sustainable? Is it just a matter of interacting better with funders, or not that or that and some additional other elements?
I think it was already a topic in the panel at the morning. So a short answer is time. Those citizen science projects need much more time. I'm in contact as the coordinator of the German citizen science platform with many project coordinators, and what they tell me is, okay, we get funding for 3 or 4 years, and we start in the first year with setting up the participatory process and trying to get volunteers involved in our projects, and that takes 1 or 1.5 years, and then they gather data or they start a co-creative process to just find the topic of their research or the aim of their research. So I think it's hard for them to conduct this research in these short-term funding schemes. They need more time, maybe 2 or 3 years more time to actually produce scientific results. So I would call for longer funding schemes.
Okay, thank you.
And one thing in addition, so this is also the case for the citizens. So when they hear, oh, I can only be part of this project for 3 years, they're also sad because they want to, they have a high incentive to contribute to gathering knowledge or data on certain topics, and most of the times the project is over, and so is the participatory process they were involved in.
I think it's exactly the issues that were raised earlier this morning, and I think from the other side, also from those implementing the projects, I think that they also need to realize or move beyond a practice that it is just checking involving citizens, check, as Pierre Meunier said earlier this morning, DMP check, I've done it, so we're good. We're like shifting to open science practices, and
okay. And there comes a responsibility when you are engaging volunteers. So you can't just leave them on their own out when the project is finished and just say, "Okay, we collected data on butterflies." You will never get to know what happens with this data.
So that being said, Anna talked about the UNESCO recommendations, and the evaluation is due in a few years, but nonetheless, I suppose that you have already mentioned that you focus on providing guidance, awareness raising, and this may be exchange of best practices. So although the official evaluation is not out yet, what are the issues that you would highlight as important, or what the challenges you would identify as important in this process?
So we've touched upon it, and I've mentioned it a little bit in my previous response. I think what we see in terms of countries taking up the recommendations and trying to implement it is really that they realize very quickly that it is not just about opening up scientific articles or having a policy for open access and it stops there. They do realize quite quickly that there is need for a shift in the way their science system is working. They realize that there is a lot of actors that need to be mobilized and engaged. These are the funders, these are the scientists, these are the communities, librarians, innovators. It's a whole ecosystem of open science actors that have to be mobilized. So for, again, even to build an open science policy for the national level, you cannot do it in a little cabinet attached to one ministry, Ministry of Science or Ministry of Education. You really have to go across and try to figure out how will that affect also the other sectors of society in the framework and spirit of openness. So it is the complexity of it, I think, that it can be a little bit of our policymakers get a little bit afraid of it. But then again, as they navigate through the system, I think that they are in different regions now. They are looking into different options. We've seen in Africa a lot member states actually wanting to open up their science policies instead of creating specific national open science policies. They are opening up their existing science policies and including elements of openness inside the existing science policies, because that actually makes science open, science in general, so that you don't have like a open science policy and then people who operate on open science side, and then you have the science policy and then people who take care of that. The idea really is that in the end, all science would be open, and that would be the science for all. So it's interesting to see how countries are trying to make this cultural shift through the policy space that they have. Some will go for actually determining their specific open science policies, open policies for open engagement, policy for access, policy for open data, policy, like all of the different policies, and then come some kind of framework. Others, as I said, will just open up the existing policies and include openness inside. So there is a little bit of experimentation also in the policy space right now to understand better what would be the best way to that works. I think another issue that we have is that we don't have a monitoring framework for open science. We don't have an evaluation framework for open science. Again, the one that exists for science evaluation or science monitoring do not have all of these openness elements, and we don't have indicators, neither qualitative nor quantitative, to actually be able to understand where is the system moving, how is it moving towards openness, how does it fulfills the values that we want for that particular system. So that's, again, we are usually focused on the outputs. We can have a look at how many publications, we can have a look at data, what's the percentage of open access if we want, but beyond that, and even for open engagement, we don't have indicators. So it's very difficult, again, if we want evidence-based decision-making, we still don't have indicators and we still don't have data, neither quantitative nor qualitative, to do that. So these are some of the challenges that we are seeing today. And another issue very quickly is funding, and a confusion whether there is funding for open science and then there is funding for science. What is the funding gap that is needed for science to switch to open science? Like, there are all of these different questions. Our responses usually are that it's not about necessarily new funding. There is always need for new funding for science, for sure, across the world in particular. But it's how do you use the funding that you already have so that it gears towards openness rather than having it going towards traditional closed science. So how do you redirect the existing funding so that it does align with the principles of open science?
I think you said an interesting thing when speaking about the evaluation of funding policies, because I have the same, I share this opinion, because I think it's really important that funding schemes for participatory research, as well as the projects that were funded, are evaluated to adapt them for the future and find better ways of funding. That's it's also the case, just as I mentioned, that project durations need to be longer. So if we can have a critical look at our project and see, okay, project duration was too short, we can adapt the next funding scheme. So I think that's really important.
Yes, thank you. I think that it's very interesting, as it was mentioned in the morning session, this diversity and interaction of the disciplines is what brings the beauty in citizen science. But as you mentioned, this maybe requires some further consideration when planning and implementing participatory projects. So at this point, I would like a bit Krista's input on this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, I think a very, very relevant point that you brought up. And again, of course, I'm thinking from the point of view of the European Code of Conduct and the ideas in it. And because, as I said, it tries to be an enabling document in the sense that it tries to promote a kind of mindset that is pro, or that promotes research integrity and ethics, including them at all stages projects. And now, as you said, that citizen science still needs to be acknowledged in the sense that so then it's even more important to take care of the quality assurance because after all, what we've been emphasizing also in this research integrity context is that somehow institutions should see promoting research integrity, training in research ethics and integrity as part of their quality assurance. Instead of, if something happens, something bad happens, you shouldn't try to sweep it under the carpet, but instead, you should have these. You should have a mindset that can deal with these issues, and I think very much also here for citizen science to make its mark, because an easy argument then after a survey or after a study that has been conducted within citizen science participatory research side is this question of what its impact will be. And if, say, let's say it this way, if the conclusions are too far-reaching, considering what the data has been, how the data has been collected, if, for example, if the medical field is a good example of all these studies where the data has been collected from like conscripts from the male population, and then it's been extended to cover all the human beings, or let's say within the social field, where the opinion polls, if they decide to for the sort of voting or for the population to disregard all people over 65 because they wouldn't be interested in these issues anymore, then they have to be they have to be mentioned, and of course it restricts the validity of the results. So I think that in a certain sense we have to keep in mind the old saying of a garbage in, garbage out. If you don't know what kind of conclusions are possible on the basis of the data you have collected.
No, I want to return to this main question, about what type of science we want. And if you have citizen science, then I always find the interesting question, what distinguishes citizen science from professional science? And my answer is the only distinction is that citizens have a stake in the outcome. And that means they give direction to science. And this is where it's all about. And in some kinds of ways, citizen science can also be dangerous because of this element. It depends on how you institutionalize it. So let me come back to the broader question. If our outputs, let's say if we look now to 2050, to the Green Deal, etc., all these transitions which we need in terms of sustainable development goals, all these transitions we don't get if we leave it up to the market. We don't get these transitions if we leave it up to the free science of ALLEA. Will not get it. We have to do more. We have to do a public intervention in how we organize science in terms. Oh yes. Well, I mean, the reason why we have a crisis in science is because we have the academies for 50, 60 years pushing a type of system which we now have to get rid of. So we are now in a situation in which to say, okay, how do we organize societal mission-oriented research? It's very interesting to look just to a classical question. I think it's a book of Robert Nelson in the 1970s. He had a book called The Moon and the Ghetto. And he asked the question, how is it possible that we can bring somebody to the moon in 1969, with a computer device less powerful as our mobile phones? But we cannot solve the problems of the ghetto. And I think for the first time in history, I think and Europe is there the first, and I think this is our advantage, is to organize research in missions which are not have a technological priority, but which have a societal priority. And that doesn't mean that it determines its outcomes. It determines its direction. This is something else. And in order to give it direction, we go further than just citizens counting birds, but also having citizens co-define the research agenda and co-evaluate the research outcomes, because they have stake in the outcomes. I mean, I'm sure you agree with that. I mean, it's, so this is the interesting and transformative element which we have here, which we also need, because if we don't have this mutual responsiveness among stakeholders, so not only citizens, also the others, then we will never have effective implementations. Because scientists, if they talk about global climate change, they have it, oh, so many degrees Celsius rise is acceptable, but what does it mean for Paris, or what does it mean for the Netherlands, or what does it mean for a city here and there? They don't know. And this you can only know if you do this type of research. So it's not about jeopardizing the freedom of research, of course. It's the other way out. It's about opening up science and opening up society as well, because this is what we have to marry. I mean, open science belongs in an open society, and in the societal dimension it means participation rights, and in science it means openness to resources, and this is what we have to marry, and we have to do this in a transparent way. And our classical system, which was covered up with the slogan of freedom of research, is that we didn't know what was going on. And we don't want to fund hobbyism, of course, if you use public funding. You want to use public funding for reasonable outcomes. So this is what the legitimacy of it's all about. So I think this is the challenge. How do we organize societal mission-oriented research, which includes citizens and other stakeholders? How do we define the research agendas? How do we monitor them? That is indeed right. We lack the right instruments, and in some aspects also the right capacities to do that, because the current missions are very often still conducted by people who are in the technological paradigm rather than in the paradigm of driving research towards societal acceptable outcomes. It's not about determining outcomes, it's about becoming responsive to public values. And all these SDG goals, well, for which UNESCO says, these are, I think, rightly the type of goals which underlie values which are more or less globally shared. They can have different meanings in particular cultures, but there's an impressive consensus about it, and this is what we have to implement in a transparent way. So this is quite contrary to a politicization of science, you know, which was indeed the old danger for freedom of research. But that's not the issue here. It's about actually the other way around, to opening up science and making it more transparent so that we know what's going on.
Thank you. Yes, I think that in addition to opening up science, I think it would be nice to open up the floor to questions and inputs, as I think that we do not have so much time. So instead of just having, yes, of course.
Yeah. Again, I think we're in the same panel, or we're talking about the same things. I'm not here to defend ALLEA or its academies, but I've never heard of an academy being opposed to citizen science. On the contrary, the academies promote freedom of research topics, freedom, and also.
I don't know if there are citizen scientists here, but apply for money with her. See what happens.
No, but ALLEA doesn't fund.
Yeah.
No, sure. ALLEA is a science academy.
Your members, they do science. They have academies. There's one in Amsterdam. I mean,
there's some.
There's one in Paris. And if you apply for money, you will get no.
Yeah, but most of the academies are learned societies and have very little money for funding. But I don't really understand this. Your comment about this that that academies would prevent the development of science. Academies don't decide on the criteria used to assess research performance, or these decisions are more political decisions these days than they used to be. And the Quara coalition has been very well received in the sense that you need to look at research performance from many angles. So I think you have to find your enemy somewhere else.
If I may jump in, so I'm really happy that we have this type of discussion, because I think all these points are extremely important. I would like to start with a question before, like, you can all think of yours, and please give me hand signs if you have one. But I do have a question about operationalizing this, about the applicability, because if we open up the science system, this to a degree means also moving responsibility. I'm thinking about specifically the question of co-evaluation, which is something we have tried, and it is really hard to do because it is such a meta question. You have so much to involve citizen scientists in, and the process itself is already so much. And then you put even more on the people. So it's really also a question of how much can you put on them, because we are paid for it, they are not. And I mean, even if they are paid for it, it's usually something they do on top of what they are doing anyways. So I'm really thinking about also not overwhelming it. And this is also about us being responsible for what we are doing as professional scientists. And I'm wondering whether someone wants to respond to this and has feelings about it. And maybe not too long, because we need some time for other questions. We have only 10 minutes left, but we can overdraw a bit.
I would agree with your statement, Stephanie, because you spoke quite critically about those crowdsourcing projects. I think the bird counter has also some stakes in those kind of projects, because he's attending, he's a participant, so he has stakes in this project. And I'm also very critical of laying too much burden on citizen science, of changing the world or changing the whole academic system in 10 years. So the term citizen science was created in 1995. So when we look back in history, now we have international associations, we have platforms and so on. I think it will take a little bit more time to change the academic system, and we have to highlight great crowdsourcing project that impacted policy or they delivered good papers, and then we can move on and also implement more participatory formats that also include citizen scientists into the definition of the research problem and so on. So I think we have to go step by step and not take a large, huge jump and just crush the whole academic system. Then citizen science and the citizen science movement will be a success.
I think another point is also that these are projects that should be done with those citizens and with those communities. So it's not about how much you want them to be involved, it's also how much they want to be involved. And I think it's this also mindset and mind shift needs to happen with researchers, so that they don't see citizens as either something that they have to do because they have to check that, or something that they want to use and then how do I exploit it to the maximum. These are your partners, these are the partners, and that's how you have to engage with them. So as equal partners, and they will tell you what's too much, they will tell you when they want to stop, and they will tell you what they want out of it. So it's for me, it's really this question of dialogue with your partners when you are designing and when you're implementing your project.
Thanks so much, Jenny. Oh, thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much for this very interesting discussion, and also maybe a bit sharpened simply to kind of liven up the discussion, which I liked. But I was thinking about something, René, you said about like the difference between professional scientists doing science and then citizen scientists doing science, and then the difference between them having citizen scientists having a stake. And I thought, but don't scientists have I mean, they're citizens as well, right? I mean, I'm a scientist, but I feel like I'm a citizen as well, and I have a stake in a just world. And I think that kind of relates to, Anna, what you just said about really cooperating and collaborating, and then not being like on one side or the other, but really being kind of on the same side, because we all want a just and fair and sustainable world. So that can also maybe help bridge these differences a little bit.
Yeah, the point of citizen science versus professional science was made just to highlight the idea how to give direction to science. So if professional scientists, as in citizens, equal with normally the citizen science movement as such, have a stake in particular outcomes, then it is of course fine. But the whole point is about how do we give, in a democratic society, in a transparent way, direction to science. So on that question, ALLEA does not have an answer. This is also not their task. So it is also fine. I mean, it's also not a problem for that organization, but it's a problem for me. We need bodies who can deliberate precisely this issue. So you are at Rathenau. So that is an institution, for example, who contributes to that debate, or can contribute to that debate. So I think this is what I try to support. That means also that we need what I always call co-responsibility. So ALLEA is one of the institutions which always has reduced responsibility to responsible conduct of research, to issues of research integrity. This is in itself not wrong. It's just way too short and falls short of the issue which we handle here. And the issue which we handle here is about giving direction to science and giving a direction to science in a legitimate way. So if you have to answer that question, you have to go to other governing institutions. So, and these governing institutions, such as Rathenau, but also as the European Commission and how we informed UNESCO and so on, have taken up this task to some extent. But not satisfactory yet. I mean, we have to improve this governance of our system. So, if we incentivize societal mission-oriented research, then we have to improve our governance of these missions, because in the shortcomings which some of the panelists have pointed out to also apply to those things. So it's a governance issue which is not satisfactorily resolved. I think this is where we have to think about, and participation is an element which plays a role there. And this is why I say the main question is not about participation as such, but about what direction we want to give to science. And then, of course, citizens have an important role, and then we run into institutional barriers in terms of financing, but also in terms of infrastructure, because if citizen science want to share data, then where are the research infrastructures where they can do it? Where can they apply for funding? ALLEA will not help them. So there are other bodies who can help. I mean, it's not their task. It's not a criticism. It's just a deficit. So don't take it personal. It's just we need other institutions who can do that. You see. So I mean, we don't. This is why we don't need ALLEA. I mean, there's responsible conduct. This is for the scientists. I mean, how they write, how they can use the data, how they produce their publications in a good way, and don't lie and all this type of stuff. But this is not our issue. I mean, our issue is much broader, much more complicated, much too complicated for ALLEA to handle. And so this is something we have to. This is why we have to have other governing institutions. So I think, like Anne Floor is at a sort of governing institution which already mediates with Parliament. So this is already a body which we can productively use for this topic. But it's still not sufficient. So this is where we have to think about. This is all I
I think I detect a small issue with ALLEA.
Which I don't understand at all. But I don't need to defend ALLEA. It has philosophy and as an association, and I started by explaining what the purpose of the code of conduct was and what its scope was, and said it was a recommendation, so you could feel free to use it or not to use it. But I don't understand your standard. So why would there be citizen science and real science? I think citizen science is part of the research. Is it the word science that again confuses us? Is it the British use of science referring only to natural sciences? Are we talking about research? We, in our code of conduct, we were very, very determined to use research everywhere, because what we're talking about is Wissenschaft, the scope, which is the scope of science. When it's used in a US context, but tends to be very natural science oriented. It's still in British English. So ALLEA is certainly defending the role of all disciplines and all interdisciplinary work, and citizen science is part of. It's an approach. Not. This is not a dichotomy.
So we have 2 more questions and then we are done for today.
So
and
can we take them together?
yes.
Yeah.
And please don't open a new bag of bees if possible.
Hi, thank you for the discussion. I was also a bit confused because I think when we do citizen science, we are talking about different things because it's an umbrella term for different kind of research. I'm practicing participatory action research, and I'm more willing to work starting from the point of view of citizens, which means I'm not, as researcher, coming to citizens, asking them to contribute to my project. I'm starting from their question, translate it into a research question, and ask them to, if we can collaborate, produce knowledge, but also solve the problems they are trying to solve. So it's a bit different from I think the model you have in mind. That's my first point. Second point is we have a history of participatory research. It didn't start in 1995. And we already know it's very difficult. And we also know that there are lots of stakes, but one of them is democracy. And I'm really strong on that one because I think empowerment is really important in democracy. And we are living in a world where democracy is in danger. And I think as researchers, we have responsibilities in that. And my third point would be we have to understand that our colleague researchers who think citizen science may not be interesting or should be tackled in a different way, and they are not always open to the idea that somebody else outside of the academic world can tell them what they have to do. That can be heard, of course, because there are also lots of lobbies trying to tell us what we should do and what we should not do. And there are lots of research topics who are completely abandoned. So we have to be careful. So of course, citizen views on science are really, I think, are really welcome. But when we talk about research agenda, we have to be cautious about that. There are strong, powerful people waiting outside and trying also to tell us what to do.
Thanks, and Marius.
Thank you also, René. I also like a debate that really gets the blood pumping, as it were. And I don't want to frame this as a counter-argument because I don't think I'm qualified for it. It just seems to me that the argument is a bit absolutist. It seems that you have a rather monolithic idea of science in mind, a kind of science that is always application-oriented, actionable. And I don't think, or I'm not sure whether that really is the kind of science or the only kind of science we need, because there's also, I think, this element of serendipity that's not to be underestimated, where you do sort of fundamental research, you just, for curiosity's sake, you investigate something, and in the end, some kind of technological innovation emerges out of that, which was not intended at all in the beginning. and maybe there should be room for that sort of thing, you know. And also another comment, I feel that maybe, I mean, as I said, I like this kind of debate, but it can be, I think, a bit dangerous to have sort of this moral high ground proselytizing sort of attitude when you're talking to people who are probably already skeptical and trying to defend their you know, that patch of the academic world. So in a way, maybe just a feeling that maybe some nuance or might be helpful in this sort of debate. My 2 cents.
I'm wondering now if you got a question out of that. I think those were both statements more than questions.
Well, maybe I think I want you to answer this, but I think, you know, I didn't want to give the impression that suddenly I want to have a science which only produces this type of knowledge I was just advocating. I was putting it the other way around. We need a correction of the scientific system so that it actually does what it does not do right now out of itself. So we have a system failure of science, so that needs to be corrected. But I think since ages, I mean, also if you look to the EU funding, there has always been funding for curiosity-driven research and industrial research and the normal framework research, which is more applied or societal oriented. So there has always been a balance of funds between these three. And sometimes it goes more in one direction or sometimes more in the other. My focus was only on when we want to have a science which produces societal relevant knowledge, which we also want to have, doesn't mean that we cannot do other things as well, is that on that latter question, we have to reorganize science and reorganize our rewards and incentive system. So it's not meant to override curiosity or whatever, or freedom of research or this type of issues. This is not the point. The point is about to create a transparent system where we need new governance structures to drive research towards particular directions, to particular transitions, which the global planet now calls for. I mean, we will not get these transitions to sustainable development goals if we don't intervene massively. So there's no question about it that we have to do it. So these are huge questions then, which we then have to answer. So it certainly is not that monopolistic as maybe the impression I gave. And on the issue raised by the lady before on participatory research, I agree. You have all kinds of forms of participatory research which can all be relevant for particular purposes. I was only highlighting one particular type of research which we have now on the landscape, the societal mission-oriented research, which is now exercised at a scale never executed before. And this gives us an opportunity to precisely to answer the main question, how to drive research towards these transitions, by including citizens and by including citizens also in setting the research agenda. And this is an issue of co-responsibility of scientists working together with actors, not just citizens, but other actors within and beyond science.
Thank you very much. Marina, do you want to say a few words?
I mean, I don't know whether the Krista or Anna or Moritz would like maybe to, okay. I think Anna would like.
Maybe just very quickly. I think there is all kinds of different structures in the science system that we have in different parts of the world for different communities, research communities, science communities, volunteering communities, etc. And I think they're all useful and they're all very valuable because it is a complex world with complex issues, and it's always good to have resources and access to these different structures. It is true that all of these structures need to do a little bit of self-evaluation in view of the need for openness of science. Again, in view of this cultural shift that has to change. So in terms of decision makers, the ministries, the other departments related to the ministry, the funders, etc., how can they reevaluate themselves and their practices in view of open science, in view of openness, etc. So I think it's very valuable to have different structures, but it is true that many of these structures need to be reassessed a little bit to be able, so that we can kind of gear them towards more open science. And I think Millennial Development Goals, Sustainable Development Goals, those that are going to come after the Sustainable Development Goals, because we will not be able to achieve them by 2030, that is an attempt by the global community to say these are the global challenges and we need everybody to contribute to this. So scientists, but also the other parts of society, right? This is how it is. It's not meant to be an obligation for everybody, certainly not for science, but it is an indication of what is needed. So, and I think they have actually done a pretty good job in steering part of the funding towards looking into these global goals, and then also understanding the interconnection between these different goals and issues, and understanding again that we have very good specific disciplines, but that they actually have to work together so that we can come up with some solutions that we would need. So lots of good things in place, but also lots of space for improvement. If we want to really solve these global challenges, and if we want science to be an important part of that as well.
Thank you. I think that this brings us to the end. So I think that Stephanie and I would like to thank you again for accepting this invitation to participate at this panel, and obviously all of you for your questions and input. I think that there were a lot of issues that were raised. There's food for thought. And a heated debate. We were not expecting that. If I'm not mistaken, there's a coffee break now. So I think that for anyone who is interested, we can continue the discussion over coffee. So once again, thank you very much.
Thanks also from my side.